The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
It is summertime, and some of these episodes are getting a little out of order, but not out of order for the audience, just out of order in terms of how we're recording it, because we're deep into working out holiday stuff. And I do want to say it's funny because just as we were coming on here, we were talking about journalism today. Someone tracked me down for a brief interview this week out of Evanston, Illinois. Her name is Haley Lloyd, and she's looking for cases out of Evanston to work on. But I wanted to tell her thank you for the interview. Said some very polite things about the show. She's much younger than I realized. Like, she somehow tracked me down. And actually, at first, I thought she had tracked me down to like my cell phone. And I was like, oh, wow, because I didn't know that was on the internet. And it's not. It was actually one of the True Crime XS lines. After 5 years of trying, it finally fixed it. It now goes to different phones where I can like listen to older voice messages. It used to be I had it on this one phone and I had to go listen to it a strange way. I had a piece of true crime news that I dropped about 3 weeks ago. I had found it, and I'm bringing it back up now because someone sent a note, and I think they're a podcaster. I didn't get the sense of like them just being a listener, but they didn't identify themselves by name. That's okay. Not going to dime anybody out. They had a question, and the question was, we talked in the past about missing persons cases that are solved by the person being found. And they asked me for examples of it, and I responded, and I kind of gave a couple. I didn't give any of the ones that like you and I have come across where we felt like this person just doesn't want to be found.
Well, right.
But I did give some examples because they asked me like what I thought the percentages were on that. And I just want to address like missing person statistics for 1 minute, then I'm going to tell the story. The number of missing persons in a given year is a very large number in terms of reports filed. And depending on the year and depending on where you read this information, it can range from 180,000 to 700,000 missing persons reports filed a year.
That's missing person reports filed.
Right. But what I try to stress to people is if you were to go on NamUs right now, and I don't know the exact number, you're probably going to see a number of missing people that reads more like 20,000.
It didn't used to be that high, did it?
No. And like that's a lot of that is technology working and reporting working.
Backlogging, getting caught up. Yeah.
Right. Getting caught up on things. It has taken years to get a national database for missing and unidentified people sorted, and they're doing a very good job of it there.
I think so too.
A vast majority of missing persons reports filed in a year, particularly when it comes to vulnerable adults and children.
There's 25,639 right now.
This is NamUs?
Yeah, missing people on NamUs. Yeah.
Okay. I was a little low, but still, it's like, it's not as big as that, several 100,000 per year. And that's because those missing persons reports are cleared. Like they get filed because for whatever reason, like could be a runaway, it could be like a genuine disconnect.
We're talking about like 95% of those are cleared.
Yeah, it's a huge number are cleared like right away. And then in the following weeks and months, and typically up to a year, another 3 or 4% of those cases are cleared. And you're really only left with a very small number of missing people per year who just aren't found. And that's in the United States and Canada. I'm really familiar with those two systems. I'm not as familiar in Europe or South America. But I'm saying all of that to say it is unusual for someone to really remain missing for any extended period of time.
I didn't see the question or whatever, but were they asking about like a situation where somebody, like a mom, left to go live a different life, and then
That's sort of what they were asking.
or was it when like we are looking at missing people and we find them alive and well on social media?
I think it was a mixture of those two things. It was kind of leaning towards that doesn't happen. And I think they've heard other people say it. Maybe they came across one episode of our show.
Which thing doesn't happen?
People don't come back from being missing people and show up again.
It does. They do. It's not a lot.
No.
But most of the time, it's either children who were abducted by their non-custodial parent.
Or just one of the parents.
One of the parents, right, and left. It can be that. It can be any person who walks away from their life. And we did a weird case a few years ago where a man had left his family and then he started a whole new life, like not too far away. I think it happened maybe in New York.
It was in the New England area.
Yeah, okay.
It was a couple towns over.
And then, so he left I think he had a couple of kids. He left, and they thought something awful had happened to him, but he was a missing person. And then, I don't know how many years it was later, he died while he was a roommate, right? Of some random guy that he just paid monthly to live there. And like he had left his life and he was found again, right?
Yeah.
We've covered several, it seems like women, and I don't know, they left their kids and everything. And then, when they're old and gray, they show back up, not necessarily. It's not the family usually saying it. It's usually law enforcement saying, just want to let y'all know that we're closing this 40-year-old missing person case because we found her alive and well elsewhere.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
And there's been a couple of fugitive cases that turn out like that, where technically not a missing person, but a wanted person. And we've covered some of those, particularly around the holiday times. We've gotten into 2 or 3 of those cases. One, I believe the guy had gone all the way to Australia, but he was from the U.S. and he was wanted.
Oh, yeah. We covered. Yeah, I remember that.
But I have a piece of news that came from Rachel Treisman from NPR wrote up the article on it. And I thought I would share it like at the top of the show to kind of address that, because I don't know that this is the oldest one I've ever seen, but it might be. It was on NPR May 6, 2025, and I found a bunch of sources. I actually was slightly familiar with this missing persons case, but it didn't relate to anything we've ever covered before. I just wanted to highlight it here because it's interesting how old it is. The headline says, police found a missing woman 60 years after she disappeared. She wants to stay hidden. Which is interesting that like now it's a news article when she wants to stay hidden. And I think there may be some mistakes in that. And I kind of debated like how this gets dropped in previous episodes, like where I decided not to do it, was I was debating, do I want to tell that story if she wants to stay hidden? And I thought I would highlight it just from the perspective of, people asking me questions about missing persons cases. Here's what it says. It says 6 decades after a young mother vanished from her small city in south central Wisconsin, authorities have found her alive and well, living in another state. Audrey Backberg was 20 years old when she disappeared from Reedsburg in July of 1962. This according to a bulletin on the Wisconsin Department of Justice website. It says the family's babysitter claimed that the two of them hitchhiked to Madison, Wisconsin, which would be about 55 miles away. And then they got on a Greyhound bus together to Indianapolis, Indiana. According to this bulletin, it says, she said she last saw Audrey walking around the corner away from the bus stop. Audrey never returned home and has not been heard from again. That is, until now. The Sauk County Sheriff's Office announced last week, so the end of April 2025, that it had resolved Backenberg's long cold missing persons case, saying she is alive and well and currently resides out of state. Further investigation has revealed that Miss Backenberg's disappearance was by her own choice and not the result of any criminal activity or foul play. That's according to the sheriff up there, Chip Meister. So the NPR article goes on to cite a few other articles, including a report on the Baraboo News Republic. It had an article back in 2002, which I know we're talking about 60 years. That would have been the 40th anniversary of her going missing. And they also talked to ABC affiliates WISN. One of the detectives is speaking to WISN as well, and they pulled one of the quotes over. It just says, Chip Meister said the case was assigned to a sheriff's office detective earlier this year for a comprehensive review as part of an ongoing examination of cold case files. That process included a thorough reevaluation of all case files and evidence, combined with re-interviewing witnesses and uncovering new insights. That detective, Isaac Hansen, said that he discovered Backenberg's sister had an Ancestry.com account, which led him to new data, including a possible address. So I called the local sheriff's department, said, hey, there's this lady living at this address. Do you guys have somebody who can just go pop in? This is according to Isaac Hansen. 10 minutes later, she called me, and we talked for 45 minutes. Hansen said that he promised Backenberg that he would keep the conversation and her whereabouts private, but said she had her reasons for leaving. I think that she was just removed and had moved on from things and kind of did her own thing and led her own life. She sounded happy, confident in her decision, and had no regrets.
Right. That's exactly what I think of, like when you do have somebody kind of show. And well, it's weird. I think of that, and then also like kidnap victims, right?
Right.
There's a lot less of that happening now, but.
So one interesting thing I saw about this, so she's 20 years old when she goes missing, way back when. And you can look her up now, Audrey Backenberg. It's Backeberg. There's a husband that has gotten reported, either by her or someone else, July 7th of 1962. She's picking up her last paycheck. So that's where we have her in time. 3 days before that, police got a report that her husband had loaded up some guns and that he had been carrying them around in his car and had threatened to kill her. Her family kind of stuck with the idea at the time that, like, they're going to find a body one day. She had 2 young children at the time of her disappearance. So she's 20, very young children. She made the call to leave back in July of 1962. So now we're in July 2025. And this woman has been missing for more than 60 years, but they have closed this case. She just did not want to be a part of the life she was living anymore, and she left. Now, is this a really common thing?
I don't think so.
No, it's not. It's not a really common thing. But when you and I are talking and we start running numbers on stuff and we say, 95% of missing persons cases are closed, that already has taken that number down to a very small percentage. Then another 3 or 4 are closed because bodies are discovered or people show back up. And then some of them, like the 26,000 that are on NamUs, stay open for a very long period of time. And right now, NamUs covers 125 years pretty well. There are still people who are missing who are not reported. There are still backlogs that are slowly being, filled out. But cases like Audrey Backenberg are more common than you realize.
They are. And those are I think we refer to them as people who are only missing to the people that report them missing, right?
Correct. Yep.
They're actually living their lives elsewhere. And that's not really a missing person, except to the people who report them missing.
Yeah.
And I know we covered a case last year, and what sticks out to me was on social media, there was like memorial stuff up, and then a woman from like a fundraiser emailed the sister and was like, I just saw your sister right here. And they had mixed the ashes with their mama.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yep. That was, I think that's been more recent. I think that was this year.
I'm not sure when we did it, but
and she was in Detroit.
Yeah. And, that was a situation where, actually she wasn't missing. She had been missing, but then they had misidentified her as a dead body.
Correct.
And when they went back to check it again, it wasn't her at all.
Yep.
And that was crazy. And yeah, but it is, it's an interesting thing for somebody to wonder about. The only reason I say it is because of my experience in how much I look. I don't do it as much now, but before we did the show, kind of leading up to it, I looked at all kinds of missing persons cases. And, when in the case that we just talked about, you've got somebody on a bus with a babysitter walking away. Okay. I mean, she was alive and well. The babysitter didn't kill her, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what I would have thought happened, right? Is that she was leaving to go live her life elsewhere. Now, it stinks when they don't tell anybody what they're doing, because I feel like that can cause a lot of grief. But I mean, people are free to do that. But it tells you sort of what kind of person they are. I mean, not to be mean, but
I don't know what kind of person she is. I don't know what kind of situation she was in. All I know is she was determined that she didn't want to be found.
Right. No, I'm not necessarily her. I'm just saying, like, if you care about somebody that has left and you think something terrible has happened to them, you've got to reevaluate the situation, right?
Yeah.
That's all.
And so she's been covered kind of in newspapers.com by some of the local papers up there. They've picked up the case here and again. So they've gotten statements from the police over the years. And I wanted to throw a couple of these out there so that people understand what they were looking at this. One of the articles quoted says, by the point everyone is looking at this in 2002, it's 40 years after the fact, Backenberg's family believes that by the point that everyone is looking at this, back in 2002, Backenberg's family believed that she had long been murdered, and they were hoping to find a tip to find her body. In fact, the article says that investigators had gotten a reliable tip from a confidential informant that her body was buried on a rural South County property, which they were planning to search with a forensic dog. Now, according to the sheriff at the time, Randy Salmon, he said his officers had spoken with investigators who were on the original case 40 years earlier, and they never felt comfortable that she's simply a missing person. He said, we don't know if she's simply a missing person living a life somewhere else, but we do know there's been no activity on her social security number. So the sheriff's office over the years has said that they have had investigators pursue numerous leads, and the case was considered to be cold. So I point all of that out to say, like, a lot of times nobody really knows what's going on. Investigating a case that old, condensing it into like a 10-part podcast series, which is something that commonly happens in this day and age, is very boring. Like, all of the work that goes into that is very boring. You are spending literally years of your life. There's a couple of different podcasts that I've talked to the hosts and the producers and different people behind the scenes over the years. they know when they get into it that like this is going to be like a really long road they're going down. And I have seen people, and I myself have scrapped stories, but I've seen people scrap an entire season of a thing because they discover something is off. And some of the time, I would say probably a quarter of the time, if you're doing just missing persons, you discover that that missing person is exactly what Meg has always said. They're only missing to that husband who reported her missing, and then her family later reported her missing. So I don't know if she's in contact with her sister or not, but if good on her sister, if her sister kept her secret all this time, she clearly didn't want to be a part of her husband's life. I don't really agree with like ditching the kids, but I was not in her shoes, so I'm not going to be the one like to judge her on what decision she made there. I would have done things slightly differently, I think. But you never know what someone was experiencing that made them do a thing.
Right. And to be perfectly honest, you don't have to be experiencing anything. Any adult can walk away from anything they want to, and they don't have to give anybody an explanation for anything.
So I brought that up today to be kind of the true crime news and to sort of address like the question of like, do people actually like walk away from their lives? We're finding more and more because like, you know, the easy thing to do for news outlets and sometimes tabloid outlets is to cover true crime things. And one of the more sensational things they do is to cover when a unidentified set of remains from 40 years ago is suddenly identified, and or when a missing person is suddenly found. We've seen that in recent months. I actually saw a teenager that had like been sort of kept by an older boyfriend. She was found. That's been in the last year. And I was shocked by like how that case kind of went. There have been multiple cases where I think you described it as like a non-custodial parental abduction. I don't know if they were all non-custodial or not, but I've seen multiple cases where a kid is now turned 18. And like I've always seen them on like NCMEC, so I see like their baby picture. But now they're 18 and they show back up and they're suddenly no longer missing.
There was a child that was found to the doctor, I think in Georgia. Is that where he was? Do you know what I'm talking about? The mom had taken him.
Oh yes, I don't know how long that kid had been missing. 7 years, maybe.
It was a while. Yeah. He was on maybe a show with a couple other parents who had similar things happen.
He had been missing from Georgia, and he ends up being found in Colorado, but he had lived maybe in Connecticut or somewhere.
Yeah, and his dad still had like his room waiting for him to come back.
Yeah, I saw that one too. That's to me that's a little more common. And again, I don't know which side of either parent is like in the right or if everybody's wrong.
If you have a child, unless you can work out an arrangement, you got to deal with the other parent.
Yeah.
If you do anything to, like, for example, that dad wanted to be part of his child's life, and the mother broke a court order to do what she did.
Yeah.
And so what she did was illegal, right? He wasn't doing anything wrong, I don't think. I mean, she just didn't want the dad in her life anymore, and that was wrong. And, now they've been reunited. I'm sure he's going to have custody, right?
Yeah.
Because I have a feel. I mean, I don't know. It's really hard, and I think you really have to look beyond yourself if you end up with a child with somebody that you don't get along with.
Yeah.
Because you have no idea how much it's affecting your child.
Yeah, and I point all this out to basically say missing people show up even 60 years later, apparently, in very strange ways. And like that doesn't mean like you should not investigate it or you shouldn't look for missing persons in your family and your friends group, but you should consider boundaries.
And I was going to say, like, a lot of missing persons reports are closed as the person showed back up.
Yeah. They don't typically make it into NamUs, or it's rare that they make it into NamUs and become part of that 25,000 people.
Right. But, it's still, if a missing person gets reported, most of the time they show back up. But as far as the long cases that are kind of like, something happened here, right?
Right.
That's it happens. I mean, I have no idea. I don't even know that you could quantify that, but it's an option, right? I have piles that I put people in when they're missing.
Yeah.
And
What went missing with them? Was there a dog? Was there a vehicle? Was there a gun? Like all those things change which pile they go in, right?
yeah, to me they do. And see, and the case that you talked about earlier, I would say that I would have strongly felt like she possibly was killed because she left her children behind. I also realized that it was 60 years ago, and occasionally you have women who know that their husband won't hurt the kids and will take care of them, right?
Yeah.
And it's you that's in danger, or you're the one being emotionally abused. And I can see where I can also think about how, like, when I had a little kid, like, I could have run away from my life a bunch of times and not look back because it's hard, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what she did. I don't know. But, sometimes it's animosity just between the husband and wife or whatever, and it's not that he's like an overall mean person and he's going to hurt his children. So I don't know. I'm not sure where that one would have landed. I'd never heard of that case before, but there is a pile that is, they're out there living somewhere. They just walked away from their life.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, to me, I don't feel like those types of cases are necessarily our business, right?
Well, I tried to avoid them for the most part, but this one got a little bit of national coverage, and I swung back around to it really because I wanted to point out that, like, the weirdest things can happen in these cases, and like, there's not really any kind of time limit on it. That like, after this much time, they're definitely deceased, or they're definitely living a new life somewhere, or whatever. Like, you don't really know.
Yeah, that's true.
And I wanted to couple this with another older thing that happened. This is kind of ongoing, but you and I talked about this kind of a text earlier this week, and the story stuck with me. So I pulled like the court records, which were available on this case, and like there's some good summaries online. I'm going to give you a little background on sort of the subject of this, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm talking about him. And I'm going to pull largely from a state Supreme Court ruling from March of '94. And I guess the easiest way to intro this guy is sort of from the court documents themselves. This is about a guy named Ralph Leroy Menzies. He had been born in Utah back in April of 1958. He grew up in a lot of abuse. By all accounts from the court records, his mom was married multiple times, and I don't know which side of this it fell on, but the stepfathers that she brought into the life of Ralph Leroy Menzies and his siblings, they weren't great people. There were lots of reports of assault. There were reports that at times they would fail to feed the children. There doesn't look to be a lot of social services intervention, but at some point we're forcing them to live in these very small rooms that, like, by description, they feel like they're probably either closets or like little bonus rooms that weren't really designed to have multiple beds for multiple children. They were held back from going to school by their family. And so in all of this, you've got the Menzies children growing up without real caretakers or parental guardians. The biological mom of this group dies very early. And one of his sisters that he shared a room with ends up taking care of their younger brother, who apparently had some type of disabilities that aren't really talked about. They describe him as being in very poor intellectual and physical health, and I don't know exactly what that means. The school records that pop up in the court documents for this gentleman show that, like, none of the siblings have a great track record for attendance at school. And when he's 18 years old in 1976, Ralph Menzies is convicted of an aggravated robbery, and he's given a very interesting sentence. That sentence is the term of 5 years to life. So you've got an 18-year-old that's convicted of an aggravated robbery, and they're either going to be in there till they're in their early 20s, or they're going to be in there forever. So 2 years into this, when he's 20 years old, July 6th of 1978, a prisoner named Johnny Ray Sloan and Ralph Menzies, they break out of the Utah State Prison. And over the course of the next week, they wreak some havoc. It's covered pretty well in the Deseret News if you have newspapers.com, or if you just want to go on their site. They have a couple of the articles where you can still read them. They're like screenshots of the articles. But a week later, July 17, 1978, it's alleged that Ralph Menzies robbed and then shot a taxi driver with a shotgun. He's put on trial for this in the fall of 1978, but the jury deadlocks on the verdict, and the case is declared a mistrial. He ends up in February of 1979. I think there's like a plea arrangement that happens. It could be a conviction that's just not recorded correctly here. But Ralph Menzies is given another 5 years to life sentence in February of 1979 for another count of aggravated robbery. He also gets a concurrent sentence running at the same time of 1 to 15 years for escaping prison. And this is going to go through the Utah court system. And in 1980, it's going to be upheld, the aggravated robbery verdict. But that's the documents that we're able to look at as they sort of unfold. Despite of these sentences feeling kind of long, with this 1 to 15 and this 5 years to life times 2, all of it being upheld in 1980, Ralph Menzies gets out on parole October 9th of 1984. That's just 4 years later. Keeping up with him in time, he's only going to be 26 years old-ish when he gets out. 26 and a half, I guess. He ends up in December of 1985 getting arrested again for what is described as the theft of Christmas decorations. It's definitely the time of year that stealing Christmas decorations would happen, in December 1985. And February 10th of 1986, so just a couple months later, he pleads guilty to this attempted theft. And he gets scheduled for sentencing March 11th of 1986. But for some reason, even though he's pled out to this attempted theft, and he has a serious enough record, which it's kind of at a time when a lot of people were held between plea deals and convictions, but they don't do that here. They release him on bail February 20th of 1986. And that's sort of where we pick up. What happens next is the meat of the story. 3 days after he's released on bail, February 23rd, 1986, a young woman named Maureen Hunsaker, she's 26 years old. She is working at a gas station in a place called Kearns, Utah. That evening, Maureen's husband, a guy named Jim, he calls her, but she doesn't answer the phone at the gas station. This worries Jim, and a little later on, he drives up to the gas station, and he finds that she's gone. And not only is she gone, she hasn't left anything behind. And I think if I'm reading this court document correctly, the cash register is empty. He goes home and he anticipates something is very, very wrong, calls the police. But around 11:05 that night, Jim Hunsaker gets a phone call. It's from Maureen. He says that she was upset and she was scared, and she tells her husband that she's been kidnapped by someone, but that she's going to be released soon. The police have already joined Jim Hunsaker at this point, and in the course of this conversation, the phone is cut off. So we know this is true. And the way that the court approaches this is pretty straightforward. The facts of it being largely undisputed to this point. And what they say about this is they say, as background reciting the facts that are largely undisputed, at approximately 9:50 p.m. Sunday, February 23rd, in Salt Lake County Sheriff's deputies were dispatched to the Gasomat station located off of West 4700 South. Deputies found customers waiting to pay, but the cashier's booth was empty and the door to the gas station was locked. The station attendant was missing, but they could still see her coat inside of the booth, and there was a radio playing. The preliminary accounting indicated that approximately $70 in cash was missing. I've seen this number as 100, 116, 125, and 70. So I don't know exactly how much it is, but the bottom line is the till doesn't balance. They recount Deputy Scott Gamble going to the home of Maureen and Jim Hunsaker. And while he's at the home at approximately 11:05 p.m., Jim gets this call. Maureen says that she had been robbed and kidnapped, but that either her abductor or her abductors, like with an S, like plural, intended to release her sometime later that night. Deputy Gamble actually spoke with Maureen, and she repeated her statement that a robbery had occurred. However, when he asked her if she had been kidnapped, he did not get a clear answer, and he could not tell in court. He could not tell us if she had refused or she was unable to answer the question. He also asked a question regarding her current location. So Jim Hunsaker again speaks with Maureen. Maureen says to him, "What should I do?" And the phone cut off. So for the next 48 hours, the question is, where is Maureen? But that's going to be answered on Tuesday, February 25th of 1986. So this is Sunday night we're talking. Tuesday at 5 o'clock, a hiker is at the Storm Mountain picnic area in an area known as Big Cottonwood Canyon. And they discover a body. She had been strangled. Her throat had been cut. Her purse was still missing. It was not in the immediate vicinity of the body. That same evening, a jailer at the Salt Lake County Jail, so this is Tuesday night, he finds several identification cards belonging to Maureen in a desk drawer that is inside the jail's changing rooms. He recognizes the picture of the driver on the driver's license as a woman who was reported missing the night before on the news. So he's remembering Monday night's news. Detectives later determined how they believe those identification cards get into the drawer. According to jail records, Ralph Menzies had been booked into the jail on unrelated charges at 6:40 p.m. on Monday night. So that's February 24th. It's right in the middle of her going missing and the body being discovered. He left the booking area for a short time without supervision and was found standing in the changing room. Shortly thereafter, and there's two reports on this. One of them says that the identification cards were found in a drawer. And now we find out that that's not actually the case. The officer who grabs Ralph, because when you're in jail, they really don't want you wandering around. They want you to stand wherever they tell you to stand. So him wandering away made an officer follow him. And that officer finds these identification cards in a clothing hamper. So he picks them up because he obviously wanted to know what this dude was up to. And he places them in that desk drawer. So they're not going to be found right away. So that's Monday night. Then Tuesday night, they realize they're there. So according to the court records, also on Tuesday evening, Tim Larrabee is a high school student. He's watching the news, and he learns that a hiker has discovered a body at the Storm Mountain picnic area. So on Wednesday, Tim Larrabee tells Salt Lake deputies that he and his girlfriend, a girl named Beth Brown, had skipped school on Monday, February the 24th, and they had been up at Storm Mountain. According to Tim, they had noticed a full-size two-door, late 1960s cream-colored automobile sitting in the parking lot. I don't know if he says this from memory because of the way the court documents are laid out, but he agrees or brings up that this vehicle would have been similar in appearance to a 1968 Buick Riviera. Tim and Beth both saw a man and a woman at the site, but they said at the time they saw them, nothing unusual had been happening. So that means, if we're tying all this together, Maureen is potentially alive during the school day on Monday after she disappears Sunday night. They hear a short scream later on, and Tim said the two of them concluded that the woman had slipped or had been frightened by an animal. But about 15 minutes later, Tim Larrabee saw the man walking alone, but neither Beth nor Tim see the woman walking again. And Tim is able to describe the suspect as a white male who's 25 to 30 years age. He says he's probably around 6'1", has a medium build, black curly hair with very prominent sideburns and a mustache, and he's wearing wire-rimmed glasses. So one of the detectives in this morass creates a composite drawing of a possible suspect based on that description. After they learn that Maureen's identification cards have been found at the jail, sheriff's detectives don't have to do much with the composite drawing except compare it to the photographs of the inmates that had been booked into the facility from February 23rd through the 25th. Although I will say this, I found this very interesting. In this jail, 1986, between February 23rd, Sunday, and the 25th, Tuesday, there were more than 200 inmates booked.
That's crazy.
Yep. But they pull out 3 photos. And one of those photos is Ralph Menzies. So a detective named Jerry Thompson, he pulls Ralph in to question him about Maureen's going missing or kidnapping and her ultimate homicide. According to Ralph Menzies, he said that on Sunday, February 23rd, he had borrowed a car from Troy Denter. He had picked up a young woman on State Street in the evening, and he told the detective that while he was with this woman, he also picked up his girlfriend, Nicole Arnold. And he drove around, but the two women were arguing. Menzies reportedly drops off Nicole Arnold and then leaves the unidentified woman somewhere around 7200 West Street or 2400 South Street. So, according to Ralph, he then goes back to his house and has a conversation with Nicole Arnold. February 28th, detectives question Troy Denter. He tells them that he had loaned his cream-colored 1974 Chevy, so not a Buick Riviera, to Ralph Menzies on Sunday, February 23rd, sometime in the late afternoon. He said that Menzies did not return the car until the afternoon of February 24th, which would have been the following day, Monday. So the detectives at this point do what's called a show up. So it's not an official lineup, but they essentially have Tim Larrabee and Beth Brown walk around the jail parking lot. And while they're walking around the parking lot, they identify Troy Denter's car as the car that they had seen at the Storm Mountain picnic area. Then they're shown a photographic lineup. It's got 6 photos in there. Tim picks out Ralph Menzies. However, according to this court record, several months later, Tim Larrabee will not correctly identify Menzies in a live lineup. So he picks out the photo, but he doesn't pick out the person. And that's because some time has passed. But it can cause some questions. I don't know how you feel about that.
Did he pick out anybody? Do we know?
From the photos, he picks out Ralph Menzies. From the lineup, he does not correctly identify him. They do not tell us here in these court records how that went down.
Right. And so, if he identified someone else, that would be one thing. If he just said, well, I just don't see the guy here, I would just say that he had changed. Either his memory had faded or he had changed to the extent, that he just didn't recognize him any longer.
I mean, shaving a haircut sometimes will make someone unrecognizable.
Right. And so it could also be a combination, right?
I'm going to draw from the word did not correctly identify Menzies to say, I believe he potentially identified another person. Otherwise, I think they would just say he did not identify Menzies in a lineup.
I would give credence to the first identification.
Yeah.
They did identify the car that he said he had borrowed.
And I believe that photograph is going to be the most recent photograph. Like the mugshot that probably was taken Monday night.
Right. And, I don't know anything about him, but some people look the same their entire lives, and some people change like daily the way they look, right?
Right.
But there are a lot of factors there. I don't know. I don't really know what to make of it. I feel like you can't, for one thing, I'm not sure why they wanted him to identify them again, except it was a live lineup.
Yeah, I think it's just a follow-up to the photographic lineup.
And because he identified the photo that was taken shortly after he saw him and the car, and the story matches the perpetrator's the perpetrator's story matches the identification of the car, right?
Correct. So at this point in time, meaning the photographic lineup is done, not the actual lineup, detectives do go through Troy Denter's car, and they find Maureen Hunsaker's fingerprint. So she's been in the car. If they actually found her fingerprint, she's been in this car. I'll say it that way. While they're doing this, they search Ralph Menzies' apartment, and guess what they find in the apartment?
Something of hers.
Her purse. That missing purse. So once they find the purse and they found this fingerprint, they charge him with first-degree murder, which is it's a capital offense in Utah. After they file these charges, a guy named Walter Britton reaches out to the detectives, and he says, on February 27th, so early days of Ralph Menzies being in jail, he tells Walter Britton that he killed Maureen Hunsaker to prevent her from testifying against him. And I'm going to add on that I believe he means for whatever he had done to her. The kidnapping, the robbery.
Right.
So
like not as opposed to something else, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a month-long trial, and a jury convicts Ralph Menzies of a capital homicide and aggravated kidnapping. He waives the jury in the penalty phase, and the trial judge sentences him to death. So over time, he files all these appeals, and 92, 94 roll through. The appeals are filed for different reasons. Some of them are errors in how things were put together, like from a technical perspective. And one of the arguments for a new trial was that the record had not been preserved and was deemed inadequate for purposes of appellate review. Trial court denied the motion. Appellate court affirmed it. Supreme Court affirmed it, of the Supreme Court of Utah. And they basically say, look, if you want to appeal, we'll give you more time to appeal, but that's not going to be the reason you appeal. And so his appellate attorneys start to appeal based on issues with the jury and how jury selection went. But ultimately, he is convicted and he sits on death row, even as we speak, even though this occurred in 1986. So, in 2026, 40 years. There has been some DNA tests done in this case, like over the years. The murder weapon was found. I believe there might have been another jailhouse informant. Nicole Arnold, her father finds Maureen Hunsaker's social security card, like the the card that you would, I guess it was in her purse, which I was always told never carry it on you, but he finds it. All of this is pretty straightforward. The whole idea of him getting the death penalty is kind of what lands him here with us today. The defense had argued that he should have gotten a life sentence, and that's where all this information about his abusive childhood and potential mental illness, one of the things they argue about, they basically were trying to save his life, and they were arguing that judicial mercy should be given to him on humanitarian grounds. The prosecution did not believe that. They believed he had a long criminal record. There was little to no rehabilitative effect observed from him having been in prison. And he's continuing to be a robber, basically, was their argument. Which, I will say this, okay, he was born in 1958. And I don't make this argument a lot, but 1986, when all of this occurs, he would have been 25 years old. He turned 26 April of that year. 25-year-old people can be really dumb. I'm not saying they are. I'm saying they can be. So, like, do you give him, the death penalty? And I think I land on, I understand how they got there. It's primarily because one of the things Walter Britton said that Ralph Menzies said to him, so it's hearsay, but he said that Ralph Menzies claimed that slitting Maureen's throat had given him the thrill of a lifetime. And I think that sat with the judge in a really bad way. If you hear me say, like, there's a murder weapon with a knife and slitting her throat, it's because she had dueling injuries. She is strangled, but she has a slit to her throat that probably contributed to her death. So it's listed in the autopsy that way. Judge Raymond Uno is the judge that's kind of taken issue with what Ralph Menzies has done here. And March 23rd of 1988, when he sentences him to death, it's the weirdest thing to me to see this in court records. Ralph Menzies has to choose how he wants to die. And he chooses death by firing squad. So he's going to be given a date, and that date is May 20th of 1988. That's going to be the day that he's supposed to die. But usually those first dates that are given in death penalty cases are stayed because there are a lot of mandatory reviews by usually appellate courts and then the Supreme Court of whatever state or whatever the ruling body is in whatever state you're in. And there can also be some federal appeals that are sort of launched. And essentially those appeals are going to delay Ralph Menzies being executed. Now, he's been scheduled several times. That first one is May 20th, 1988. He ends up getting a rejected appeal March 11th, 1992. Then March 29th, 1994, they fully uphold his conviction and his sentence. He gets a death warrant. It's going to be executed by firing squad June 2nd, 1995. But his attorneys managed to get him a stay of execution on May 4th, 1995. At this point in time, they do talk to the family of Maureen Hunsaker, and they, at least her parents and I think someone else in there, expressed disappointment that he was not going to be executed. May 16th, 1996, he ends up filing a request for a federal public defender, and it's rejected by a U.S. magistrate named Ronald Boyce. It's rejected because his state appeals are not yet exhausted. But ultimately, what's happening there is when you're represented by a public defender and the first stage is over, you actually get a new set of lawyers who are called appellate defenders in most jurisdictions. This case would be even more unique because along the way you would have a capital defender, and each type of public defender specializes in a state level type of prosecution defense, either at the district and superior court level, which is like the local jurisdiction. District court's where everything starts. Superior is where it goes when it's serious. Once you're convicted in the superior court, your appeals go to an appellate court. And usually there's a ruling body that's like a tribunal called the Supreme Court of most states. And they're sort of overseeing it. But if you were to go to the federal system for some type of writ of habeas corpus or something else related to your appeal, you then have to have a federal public defender. And it's rejected at first. He's slated to be executed November 10th, 2003 at that point. And again, a new appeal is filed. It's rejected. He starts filing in October 2004 through counsel requests for different types of DNA testing. And that's when the children of Maureen Hunsaker, particularly her son, who was, I think he was 10 years old when his mother was killed, they start speaking out. And the appeals get more and more Hail Mary-ish. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like they're longer shots at having any type of success. For instance, April 2nd, 2012, there's an appeal that's filed in the 3rd District, which is that's the federal system. It's rejected. That one was an effective assistance of counsel. On September 23rd, 2014, Utah stops hearing Ralph Menzies' appeal and rejects the last one. And then he moves into the district court kind of full-time for like the U.S. District Court. January 12th, 2019, there's an appeal that's rejected. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals on November 7th, 2022, they dismiss post-conviction relief request. And then October 18th, 2023, his case has wound its way all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and they just ignore it. They refuse to hear it. So on December 23rd, 2023, there's a lawsuit filed. It's filed on behalf of Ralph Menzies and 4 other condemned prisoners. And it's basically filed saying that Utah's death penalty laws are unconstitutional. It is ultimately dismissed out of the 3rd Circuit Court, which that might be Utah, like state court circuit. But we do get into some interesting nonsense with him. Otherwise, why would he be here? So let's talk about this just for a second. This is a pretty, I hate to say this because there's a tragedy in here for an entire family, but this is a pretty run-of-the-mill murder. It's pretty straight up. Like they found his fingerprints. There was a witness. They saw him. He talked to his bunkmate more than likely. That guy came to court. Like this is not super complicated, right?
I think that it was shown to be him.
Right. Well, there's a section of the population out there among attorneys who do not want people to die under the death penalty. And I have to be honest, like sometimes I side with them. Like it's pretty rare that I look at a case and go, that's a death penalty worthy case. And whether this case is or isn't is not really in my purview right now. But
because it was decided, right?
Yeah.
It was decided and it's had lots of opportunities to be overturned, right?
Right. So on January 17th of 2024, the people that be, meaning the Attorney General, I believe would be the title in the state of Utah, they request a new execution date. And he had been sentenced to die before May of 2004. And because this has dragged on so long, he had been allowed to choose at a time you could choose between lethal injection and firing squad. He chose firing squad. But this is the 3rd time the state is going to try to actually execute him. His defense counsel files yet another appeal. And this is what I find interesting. This appeal states that he should not be executed because they have deemed that he is mentally incompetent. They have reported that this has gone on so long that at this point in time, he suffers from dementia, and that dementia prevents him from understanding why he's being put to death. So an official hearing to approve the death warrant was supposed to commence on February 23rd, 2024, but February 13th, 2024, a judge cancels that hearing and directs the state to seek an independent report on Ralph Menzies' current mental competency for execution. Matt Hunsaker, Maureen's son, is now, like, he was 10 years old when this all happened. he is now no longer 10 years old. It is 2024. We have moved into where he's in middle age now. He points out that his maternal grandmother died in 2021. She did not get to see her daughter's killer executed. But from his perspective, he wants closure, and he has sort of inherited the wish to continue this pursuit of justice. So 39 years later, this guy still wants to see this happen.
Well, that's his right?
Absolutely.
I mean, all of this has been ordered and it's gone through the system, right? It's a little crazy that it's taken this long, but like we know that this happens, right?
Yep. Yeah, and so where this like kind of picks up is August of 2024. There's a competency hearing that's set up. He's also sent for psychiatric evaluation, meaning Ralph Menzies. And Matt Hunsaker, for his part, basically just says to the court, please, whatever you're going to decide here, do it in a way that, like, you know, is expeditious. He wants, like, if defendants get speedy trials, he wants, like, a speedy end to whatever they're going to do next. So they scheduled this hearing November 18th, 2024, but in October of 2024, so about a month before this hearing is supposed to come up, the counsel that are representing Ralph Menzies now are saying that there's information that the original prosecutors failed to disclose to the defense, and they're charging that prosecutors had been communicating and coordinating with state agencies. And at first, you can't tell if they're talking about now or then. But they make a motion to disqualify the prosecution from Menzies' competency hearing, and it makes it clear that they're talking about current prosecutors. That is denied by Judge Matthew Bates, this motion to disqualify the prosecution. And they do begin the competency hearing November 18th with Judge Matthew Bates presiding. The state brings forward medical experts. They bring a neurologist named Ryan Green, and they bring in a forensic psychologist named Michael Brooks. They're from departments within, like, Utah's Department of Health and Human Services. They state that Ralph Menzies is competent to be executed. This hearing lasts about 5 full days. It concludes November 22nd, 2024. They have a final competency hearing that they schedule for May 7th, 2025. And Judge Matthew Bates rules on June 6, 2025, that Ralph Menzies, who is now, like, in all of this, he's going to be 67 years old. I think he turned 67 this year. Yeah. He rules that he is mentally competent to be executed. And the judge says, like, there is, like, some sign that, like, his cognitive abilities have deteriorated as a result of potential dementia, but that he consistently and rationally understood the magnitude of his actions. And there was no evidence that the execution would violate his Eighth Amendment rights. And ultimately, the Eighth Amendment is what people would call the protections against cruel and unusual punishments. Bail falls into this, fines fall into this. And June 9th, there's a renewed motion to issue that death warrant that prosecutors wanted from the Attorney General's office. And again, Ralph Menzies' defense counsel files an appeal to the Utah Supreme Court to overturn Judge Matthew Bates' ruling. They seek a second competency hearing, arguing that his mental state had rapidly deteriorated and it made him ineligible for execution. In spite of this, July 9th, 2025, Judge Matthew Bates signs this death warrant and schedules the execution date as September 5th, 2025. And I'm guessing what we will get next is he's continuing to deteriorate, because that's what happens when you have dementia. But I bring all of this up to ask you, what do you think about the idea that we can't execute someone who has clearly used every appellate trick in the book through very clever lawyering? And I'm saying Ralph Menzies is doing it, but you and I both know these are lawyers doing this.
Right. They are lawyers, and they're doing their job, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me like they might be doing it too well, because you have to think, if you have, I mean, he is a little young for dementia,
Yeah.
but it's ridiculous that a victim's family would have to go through this, right? Either, put the person in jail for life, or, once the appeals have gone through, take care of it, right? I
Yep.
feel like this is like one of the things that sort of fell through the cracks, maybe. I don't know. This seems like a really long time for
I,
him to be
I
on
don't know.
death row.
I don't know how they managed to do like so successfully now, basically 40 years after the fact. I don't know how they managed to make it so sort of compelling.
Well, I guess while you were going through all of that, it seemed like in between, like, everybody thinking up all the other reasons they could appeal it,
Yeah.
like, nobody set, like, when something was, denied, they didn't immediately set a death date, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that gave it more time. In this particular situation, so a judge sentenced him to death. It makes no difference to me that he now has dementia. It doesn't change anything about the crime, right? And while it is unfortunate, and I could also argue the other side, the state waited too long, right?
Yeah.
That could be the other argument. And, then they would say, well, the defense has caused this. But as far, if when someone commits a crime and then they get charged much, much later, like, a lot of times it goes back to what the penalties were at the time, right?
Yeah.
Well, this goes back to what the punishment was at the time, right?
Yeah.
And I guess somebody could say, if you get to the point you have dementia, your death sentence is automatically commuted to life without the possibility of parole. But, like, then everybody's going to have dementia, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like if you think to yourself that basically anybody who's sentenced to death is really just getting sentenced to sit on death row, it's a lot easier to take, right?
Yeah.
But I do find it compelling that a man who he was fairly young, right? I mean, he was
Yeah.
fairly young when he was sentenced to death. Now he's an old man, and they say he has dementia, but there's also indications that he's well aware of things in the past. That's the other thing. If you haven't been around somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia, a lot of times it's their shorter term memory that isn't great, and they'll remember things from a long time ago, but, like, you have to introduce yourself to them every day because they don't know who you are.
Correct.
And so that's something to take into consideration. And I mean, what would be the next step? Could they say that it's unfair to keep him in jail because he doesn't understand why he's there?
I don't know where this is headed. I look at this from the perspective of I'm all for the process being fair and equal. That can be complex at times. When I look at this particular case, I hate to use the word boring because I think that's unfair to victim and victim's family. It's a fairly straightforward robbery that, like, for some reason he decides to turn into a kidnapping, which for some reason in my opinion, he probably turns into a sexual assault. If not, then it's a witness killing. So kind of take your pick on which thing it is. And then he commits a murder after having been, incarcerated. I buy the witness killing thing because he is essentially
not wanting to go back to prison, where he has basically been since he was 17 years old. And I look at a case like this. You got the borrowed car, you got the eyewitnesses, you got the fingerprint in the car, you got the person in his house, you got the knife that probably slit her throat. You know, he has strangled her on top of that. This is a terrible homicide. But at this point in time, this is a guy that probably should have been executed in 2004.
Or earlier.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm thinking in terms of, like, the standard delays that people complain about. Frequently, it's like 20, 25 years.
Well, and I think that they need to stick with what it was ordered initially. They've tried all, no panel of judges has overturned it, right?
Right.
And there's been a death warrant issued. And I do see the point, but I could also say, well, it would be cruel and unusual to have somebody be in jail for something they don't know that they did or whatever. But that's not going to undo, think about how that would affect everybody, right?
Right. And I think my solution to this would be, at some point in time, like, if you're just not going to carry out the death sentence, or if everything's going to be, like, argued the way that it's going to be argued, then ultimately this becomes a life in prison without parole case. But that's not what the judge sentenced him to. And when I look at this, that's the only thing I can think of that would kind of make the lawyers stop lawyering here.
Is
life in prison without parole, like a commutation of the sentence to life in prison without parole.
Right, which I would be fine with. However, it doesn't sound, it sounds like the victim's son said, whatever it is, it just needs to happen. Is life on death row, that where, they don't ultimately get executed, all they do is die on death row, like natural causes, is that worse somehow than life in prison without the possibility of parole?
I mean, I think they're both relatively awful.
It's unlikely that prisoners are able to escape now, right? Especially people who are in jail for life without the possibility of parole. They've typically, well, I would say all of them have probably committed a violent crime that got them there. And so we just don't have the same jail breaks that, we had at different times before we had more, technology and training, and they had learned how to basically keep prisoners secure, right?
Yeah.
And so there's not a real chance that somebody's going to get out. Here or there, sure, things happen. But I would say that overall, you can pretty much bank on the person being in jail for the rest of their life.
Yes.
Unless there's some sort of huge ruling that overturns it, right? Which happened in the 60s or 70s, where everybody that had been sentenced to death got their sentence commuted.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I think it's pointless to distinguish between being put to death and serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. I have not been on the victim's receiving end of that.
Yeah.
Right. So I feel like I'm talking about it sort of maybe even out of turn. I don't know. I feel like people should, I don't think it matters either way. I don't think the dementia should cause something that was sentenced so long ago to change now. There's got to be a better solution than this.
Yeah. It's fascinating the amount of resources this is sucking up. And, to be fair, if this were more of an innocence case, I would have questions but that's not even what they're arguing at this point. We've moved past the phase where, everybody's kind of given up and gone, yeah, he probably did this, but one more thing. It's not fair because of this. It's not fair because of that. And, I frequently side with the defense, but, I don't know what their ultimate goal is here.
Well, they want to get the death sentence overturned. And it seems like if that was going to happen, it would have happened.
Well, I will say Utah is kind of actively executing people. I think they executed someone last year. They only have about 4 or 5 people on death row, and there's been some rulings this year that might come up in a later episode that we'll talk about. Where it's interesting how this is all like played out. I don't think, for me personally, that dementia after 40 years of appeals should change a ruling other than to state like, all right, fine, he's going to be spending we're going to do a commutation. If they want to do that, though, the appropriate process would have been, and I don't know if they've done this or not. I don't see it in here, but that doesn't mean it's not here. This means I haven't seen it. The appropriate process would be to petition through whatever clemency process they have with the state governor and have the state governor commute the sentence to life without parole.
Right. And that could have been done and denied, right?
Right. That could have been. It's not mentioned anywhere in here, but that doesn't mean I didn't miss it.
I doubt very seriously these different teams of attorneys who have done all of these appeals missed that.
Yeah, it would set an interesting precedent if it were to like be ruled that you can't execute a demented person.
No, I don't think they can do it. I don't think that you could do that because of there are objective standards of what dementia is, but a lot of it's subjective, right? And everybody on death row would have dementia if they didn't want to be put to death.
Right.
And so you can't really, you can't make that distinction because especially since it would be an appeals court doing it, like that could set precedent, right?
Yep, it could.
And then you're going to just, I don't know. I realize victims sometimes sort of bank on the person getting put to death. And that is absolutely their prerogative for justice for their loved one that they lost.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is, I know that being put to death in the United States, even if you're sentenced to death, I would say it's not a high chance that you're actually going to be put to death.
Right.
And I think that wastes a lot of resources. It causes the family to be victimized over and over again. And I don't know I'm not sure how fair it is, but if you want to hold out for it, that you can absolutely do that. But it is an interesting concept, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of competence for execution after years and years and years on death row. But this could also be proving the argument that like life in prison versus death row like are equally expensive in some ways.
I actually think that the appeals would make death row more expensive.
That's a possibility.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day because of whatever, and it seems to me like, especially, once somebody's been sentenced to death row, it's unlikely they have an attorney besides the public defender, right?
Right.
And at that point, it's tax dollars at work. And, while it sounds like these are very thorough attorneys, and honestly, everybody in the country should get the most vigorous defense possible, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's just technical appellate issues. I think the issue here is like they can't seem to get it acted on fast enough before they think of something new to bring up. And you have to think that if your client or if the defendant has gotten dementia, like the process isn't efficient enough.
Yeah. No, especially when he was 25 years old when he was sentenced to death in the first place. Or 26, whatever it was.
I don't know. I feel like I could go either way on it. And I realized recently that when I say that, I don't say it from the point of view. I say it from a social point of view, a society point of view. I don't say it from like a victim's point of view,
Right.
because, you know, I feel like that would be wrong to take that away from like a victim's family, that this has gone through the process and that's the expectation. They're just waiting on it, right? And so I think it could be a lot. I think it could be streamlined a lot, including just stop sentencing people to death, because it's kind of pointless anyway. But I don't know. I feel like maybe I spoke out of turn. I don't know about that. I just can't decide. I go back and forth on. I'm actually okay with people being sentenced to death. I'm not okay with the fact that like they get sentenced to death, but they're never put to death. That's my problem with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. I really wanted to share this story because everything I read like kind of glances over Maureen, and I wanted to bring her up and like focus on her for the larger part of this story, and kind of acknowledge the fact that she is a victim who also left behind living victims. And it's just interesting to me that it's taken so long for all of this to happen. I am very interested in seeing how it wraps itself up. And if it wraps itself up, I guess would be the better way to phrase that. Because they may execute him in September 2025. And that is like people being executed in this day and age is highly interesting to me. And I feel like there's enough time and distance on this case that like looking at it, it's one of those rabbit holes that people can fall down. I fell down the one of the ways we end up here is obviously this current story, but I find Utah's death row fascinating, and at some point it may come up again. But
it's another firing squad, because like he already picked the method, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And so they're gonna. I guess maybe it's just coming front and center because of the whole like drug cocktail issue when they give someone a lethal injection. But I find it interesting that has come up several times. And I got in trouble on a social media platform for stating firing squad about the death penalty, and then I appealed it and I said, this is absolutely something that's happening, right? And I was like, there are articles about like there were, I think, 2 men in South Carolina very recently executed by firing squad.
Yep.
And my appeal was denied. And I was like, what crazy lunacy are we living in where that type of comment is like essentially got me put in social media jail or whatever.
I did not know that had happened to you. I think I would be highly irate at that.
I was pretty irritated because I just thought, well, and I'm sure it had like a partial automation to it. I do understand like saying firing squad is, I don't know, something, but I was really surprised though, because it's an actual thing. And I'm thinking to myself, if our social media algorithms looking for, problems, they say that me saying firing squad is bad, like where are we in the world, right? Like, is it what you see what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
Okay.
I do.
I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe if I can't say it on social media, maybe we shouldn't do it. I don't know. I don't know where we're at, but that was crazy. But it came up. And when I was trying to talk about it, I just couldn't, because I just kept getting in trouble. And I'm like, well, this is happening. This is actual news. It was the craziest thing.
Yeah. You can currently be executed by firing squad in Idaho, Mississippi, South Carolina, Utah, and Oklahoma, I believe. Those are the places where it's either a backup method or a primary method of execution.
In this case, he picked the method, right?
He did. He picked the method 40 years ago. So.
Yeah, that's.
And it's come back around. Like, so that's so interesting that like it went out because, it's barbaric, but now it's come back around. And like you stated, like they won't even let you say it on social media, and yet it's happening in 6 U.S. states. I think that's 6, right? Yeah.
I wonder, was it deemed barbaric? Is that why it stopped?
I mean, it is barbaric. It is a terrible way to die. But at some point in time, rulings have been made that, like, we're not there to hold their hand and have it all be kittens and butterflies at the end.
Well, I was going to say, it's a punishment, right?
Correct.
And the whole reason it even became a thing at all was because of the problems getting the drugs for the lethal injections.
Yeah.
And that is what stymied the entire death row process, like most recently, I would say, as far as when they couldn't do the lethal injections, that's when it really slowed down and just seemed like they couldn't get that worked out. And the states that reinstated the firing squad, or I don't know if maybe they just never...
I don't think they ever went away. Like, they have come and gone in some places. So since 1960... if my reading is correct, there have been 6 executions by firing squad. 4 of those were in Utah. 2 were in South Carolina. One was
this year.
Well, one was 1960. One was 1977. One was 1996. Then I think the next one was 2010. So there is a lag until 2025, and then I think there were how many would that be? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4. So there'd be 2 more in 2025.
Yeah, in South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
And
Brad Sigmund, and then...
I think those were this year, weren't they?
Yeah. Yep.
And they were right in a row, and it was like...
Yeah, one was in, I think one was into February, early March, and the other one was in April. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can't believe I got in trouble on social media for that.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up by saying I want to see if this guy actually gets executed by firing squad.
It's September 5th?
7th person. September 5th of this year. Yep.
So he'll be the 7th person in the country or just in Utah?
In the country. It says 1960, I believe.
Okay. And so, yeah, 7, for 7 people to die by firing squad, if he becomes the 7th, right now it's at 6, I feel like that makes it sort of a reserved punishment, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's a weird one. And like, I wasn't even coming at this from the perspective of like, is the death penalty right or wrong? I was just wanting to have like a story about this particular interesting twist and turn to a death penalty case.
Well, sure. But to discuss it, you have to sort of get back to that, right?
Yep.
Because otherwise it wouldn't be up for debate. You would just say, oh, he really has dementia, we can't put him to death, right?
Yep.
Except he didn't have dementia when he committed the crime. But I also believe it's not really his fault that he hasn't been put to death yet. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but so we'll keep an eye out and see what happens.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.